Story 1. The biting Finnish wind, a familiar companion through my 30 years as a detective, felt particularly sharp that December 24th. It wasn't the kind of chill that invigorated. It was the kind that gnawed at your bones, a grim reminder of the darkness that had settled over Rovaniemi exactly 10 years prior. I was Detective Inspector Ilara Korpela, and for a decade, the Christmas Eve cold case had been a phantom limb, a constant ache I couldn't quite shake. The case, officially known as the Aurora Borealis abduction, was burned into the collective memory of our small Arctic city. 10-year-old Anya Virtanen had vanished from her home on the stroke of midnight, just as the northern lights painted the sky in an ethereal dance of green and purple. No forced entry, no ransom note, just an empty bed and a gaping hole in the hearts of her parents, Marco and Lena. I remembered the initial days of the investigation vividly. The frantic search, the sniffer dogs shivering in the snow, the desperate appeals to the public. Every lead had evaporated like breath in the frigid air. We'd interviewed everyone remotely connected to the Virtanen family, neighbors, teachers, distant relatives, even the seasonal Santa Claus impersonators who frequented Rovaniemi during that time of year. Nothing. Anya had simply vanished into the silent, snowy night. For years, the case file sat on a dusty shelf in my office, occasionally pulled out, reread, and then returned with a sigh of defeat. My colleagues had moved on, their attention consumed by new crimes, new mysteries. But for me, Anya's disappearance was different. Perhaps it was the sheer innocence of the victim, or the cruel irony of her vanishing on a night meant for joy and wonder. Whatever it was, the case had burrowed deep into my psyche. This year, however, something felt different. A fresh snowfall had blanketed Rovaniemi, coating the city in a pristine, almost magical white. Yet, beneath the beauty, an unsettling feeling had begun to prick at the edges of my thoughts. It was the 10th anniversary, and with it, a renewed sense of urgency. I found myself drawn back to the old case file, leafing through the brittle pages, the faded photographs of a smiling Anya. Her bright blue eyes, framed by a shock of blonde hair, seemed to stare out at me, pleading for answers. My apartment, usually a haven of quiet contemplation, felt restless. The scent of pine from the small Christmas tree I'd begrudgingly put up seemed to mock my solitude. I poured myself a mug of strong Finnish coffee and spread the case documents across my kitchen table, the silence of the night punctuated only by the occasional creak of the old building. I started with the initial witness statements. Marco and Lena Virtanen, both devastated, had provided consistent accounts. They'd put Anya to bed around 9 p.m. Marco had gone out briefly to check on their reindeer. They ran a small tourist sleigh business, returning around 10 p.m. Lena had been reading in the living room. They both swore they hadn't heard a sound until they discovered Anya was gone. The lack of forced entry was always the most perplexing aspect. It suggested someone Anya knew, someone she might have willingly let in, or someone who had a key. But who? Their small circle of friends and family had been thoroughly vetted. I pulled out the map of Rovaniemi we had used during the initial search. The Virtanen home was on the outskirts of the city, bordering a dense forest. The search parties had fanned out into the woods, but the deep snow and treacherous terrain had hampered their efforts. We'd even used a small drone, a novelty at the time, but it had yielded nothing. My eyes fell on a small, handwritten note tucked into a plastic sleeve. It was a list of Anya's favorite things, compiled by Lena. Teddy bear, starlight book, hot chocolate with marshmallows, drawing pictures of reindeer. Simple, innocent details that twisted a knife in my gut. I remembered the lead that had briefly offered a flicker of hope. A report of a man seen near the Virtanen property in the hours leading up to the disappearance. He was described as tall, with a distinctive limp, and wearing a dark hooded jacket. We had followed up on every lead involving men with limps in the region, but none had panned out. The description was too generic, the sighting too fleeting. As the hours stretched into the early morning, a new thought, a fragile thread of an idea, began to form in my mind. What if we had been looking in the wrong place? What if the key to Anya's disappearance wasn't in the usual suspects or the immediate vicinity of her home, but in something more subtle, something we had overlooked in our desperation? I focused on the time of her disappearance, midnight, precisely when the Aurora Borealis was at its most vibrant. Rovaniemi, being the official home of Santa Claus, attracted tourists from all over the world during Christmas. The city was a hive of activity, even late at night. Could Anya's disappearance be connected to this influx of visitors? A stranger, perhaps, someone who could blend seamlessly into the festive chaos and then vanish without a trace? It was a possibility we had considered, but perhaps not explored with enough depth. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. It was a lonely sound, but tonight it felt like a prompt, urging me to dig deeper, to finally unearth the truth buried beneath a decade of silence and snow. I knew this Christmas Eve wouldn't be about celebration for me. It would be about Anya. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt a flicker of something akin to hope, a faint aurora of possibility in the vast, cold darkness of the unsolved. The next morning, the air in the station felt different. My usual Monday routine of paperwork and perfunctory meetings was replaced by a singular focus. I walked past the bulletin board adorned with cheerful Christmas decorations, their bright colors a stark contrast to the grim reality of the case I was reopening. My colleagues, seasoned veterans and fresh recruits alike, glanced at me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. They knew the Aurora Borealis abduction was my personal ghost. My first stop was the archives. The old files, stored in a climate-controlled room, smelled faintly of dust and forgotten hopes. I specifically requested the files pertaining to tourist activity in Rovaniemi during December 10 years ago. It was a long shot, but if Anya had been taken by a transient, someone not part of the local fabric, then tourist data might hold a hidden clue. The initial investigation had focused heavily on locals, on anyone connected to the Virtanen family. While thorough, perhaps that very thoroughness had blinded us to an external possibility. My new theory was simple. The sheer volume of visitors during Christmas could provide perfect cover for a calculated disappearance. I spent the entire day poring over flight manifests, hotel guest lists, and even the records of local tour operators. The data was overwhelming. Thousands of people had descended upon Rovaniemi that Christmas. It was like looking for a single snowflake in a blizzard. As the afternoon wore on, my eyes, tired from scanning endless lists of names, landed on something peculiar. A small, independent Arctic photography tour group that had been staying at a secluded cabin resort about 30 kilometers outside Rovaniemi. They had checked out on December 26th, 2 days after Anya's disappearance. What caught my attention was their stated purpose, to photograph the northern lights. It wasn't unusual, of course. Many tourists came for that very reason. But the group was small, only 5 individuals, and they had booked their stay for precisely the week of the abduction. My mind, fueled by caffeine and a decade of frustration, began to connect tenuous dots. Could one of them have stumbled upon Anya, or even targeted her? I cross-referenced the names on the photography tour's manifest with the initial witness statements and the list of individuals we had already interviewed. None of them appeared. This wasn't a smoking gun, not by a long shot, but it was a new path, a previously unexamined avenue. One name in particular stood out, Elias Thorne, listed as the group's leader and photographer. His occupation was described simply as freelance photographer. A quick search in our national database showed no criminal record, no red flags. He was a blank slate. Yet there was something about the name, the vague description, that snagged at my investigative instincts. I remembered the early reports of a tall man with a limp. Was it possible Elias Thorne had a limp, and this detail had simply been missed or not deemed significant enough to warrant further investigation at the time, given the overwhelming number of leads? I knew I needed to dig deeper into Elias Thorne. I decided my next step would be to visit Lena Virtanen. It had been years since I'd spoken to her, not since the last official review of the case. I knew it would be painful for her to revisit that night, but I needed to understand every detail, every emotion, one more time, through the lens of my new theory. Perhaps a small, seemingly insignificant memory, previously dismissed, might now resonate. The drive to the Virtanen's home was quiet, the snow-covered landscape reflecting the somber mood. Their small wooden house, once filled with the warmth of a young family, now felt like a mausoleum. Lena answered the door, her face etched with the passage of 10 years of grief. Her once bright eyes now held a deep, lingering sadness. She recognized me immediately. "Detective Corpella," she said, her voice thin. "It's been a long time." "Lena," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know this is incredibly difficult, but I'm looking at Anya's case again. There are some new angles I want to explore." She led me into their living room, a space frozen in time, still adorned with some of Anya's drawings. A small, framed photograph of Anya, smiling brightly, sat on the mantelpiece, surrounded by flickering candles. The air was heavy with unspoken sorrow. I began by apologizing for revisiting their pain. Then I explained my new line of inquiry, focusing on the influx of tourists. Lena listened patiently, her gaze fixed on the photograph of her daughter. "We always thought it was someone local," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Someone who knew our routine. And that's what we focused on," I acknowledged. "But sometimes the obvious can blind us. Lena, I need you to think back to that night, to the days leading up to it. Did you notice anyone unusual? Anyone new in the area? Even the slightest detail, something you might have dismissed as unimportant?" Lena closed her eyes, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "It was just so festive, Detective. So many people. Carols, laughter. It all feels like a dream now, a cruel dream." Then, a flicker of something in her eyes. "There was a man. Not a tourist, I don't think. He was around a few times, near the forest path behind our house. He always seemed to be looking at something in the woods, through a camera, a very large one. I thought he was just an aurora hunter, a photographer perhaps." My heart quickened. "Can you describe him, Lena?" "Tall," she said, her brow furrowing in concentration. "And I remember he had a peculiar way of walking, a slight drag in one leg. And he always wore a dark, heavy jacket, even when it wasn't that cold. A tall man, a limp, a photographer." It matched the vague description from the initial reports, and now it matched Elias Thorne. The puzzle pieces, previously scattered and meaningless, were beginning to align, forming a chilling silhouette in the shadows. "Did you ever speak to him?" I pressed, trying to keep the excitement from my voice. Lena shook her head. "No, he just appeared and disappeared, like a ghost. I just thought he was one of those nature enthusiasts who come to the Arctic." The word ghost hung in the air. Anya's ghost. The ghost of an unsolved case. But now, thanks to Lena's memory, this ghost was beginning to take on a tangible form. I thanked Lena, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was a path forward, a glimmer of hope in the 10-year darkness. Elias Thorne. I had a name, a description, and a reason to believe he might hold the answers to the Christmas Eve cold case. My next step was clear. Find Elias Thorne, and uncover what he was truly photographing that fateful night. The name Elias Thorne echoed in my mind as I drove back to the station. The pieces were falling into place with an unnerving precision. A tall man, a limp, a photographer, spotted near the Vertanen home around the time Anya disappeared, precisely when an Aurora photography group, led by a man named Elias Thorne, was in the region. It felt too coincidental to be anything less than significant. Back at my desk, I initiated a deeper dive into Elias Thorne. Our national database, which had yielded nothing criminal, was just the starting point. I needed to go international. The internet, a tool we didn't have to its current extent 10 years ago, was my new primary weapon. I scoured photography forums, social media, and travel blogs. It was a tedious process, sifting through countless images of the Arctic and the Northern Lights, but I was relentless. Finally, late into the night, a hit. An obscure online photography portfolio, updated sporadically, belonging to an E. Thorne. The images were breathtaking, vast, desolate landscapes, stunning wildlife, and of course, the ethereal dance of the aurora. But among them, something else caught my eye, a series of photographs taken in what looked unmistakably like the Rovaniemi area, specifically the wooded outskirts. And in one of those photos, taken at dawn, there was a faint, almost unnoticeable figure in the distance, near what appeared to be a small wooden house. The Vertanen's house. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. Elias Thorne had been there. He had documented the very landscape surrounding Anya's home. But why? I noticed a detail in one of Thorne's self-portraits. A slight blurring around his left leg, almost as if he was compensating for an injury. The limp. Lena's description. It was all there. The next morning, armed with this new information, I briefed my superiors. There was skepticism, naturally. 10 years of cold leads had made everyone wary. But the consistency of the details, combined with the lack of any other viable suspects, was compelling. I secured a warrant to access more detailed travel and financial records for Elias Thorne. The data slowly trickled in, painting a clearer picture. Elias Thorne was indeed a transient. He traveled extensively, often to remote, beautiful locations, focusing on nature photography. His financial records showed a modest but steady income from photo sales and commissions. Nothing screamed child abductor. Yet, the pattern of his movements around Rovaniemi 10 years ago, specifically near the Vertanen property, was undeniable. One small detail in his financial records jumped out. A significant purchase from a specialized camera equipment store in Helsinki, just weeks before he arrived in Rovaniemi. It was for a high-powered night vision lens. This wasn't just for capturing the aurora. It was for seeing in extreme low light, for observing things unseen. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a chilling finality. Elias Thorne wasn't just an aurora photographer. He was an observer, perhaps even a voyeur. He was there not just to photograph the lights, but to document the solitude, the stillness of the Arctic night. And on that fateful Christmas Eve, he had likely been observing the Vertanen home, perhaps drawn by the warmth of a family celebrating amidst the snow. The thought made my stomach churn. Had he been watching Anya? Had her innocent presence, bathed in the glow of the Christmas lights, become an object of his twisted fascination? With the evidence mounting, albeit circumstantial, it was time to locate Elias Thorne. His last known address, according to his travel records, was a remote cabin in Lapland, far to the north, even more isolated than Rovaniemi. It was a place where one could truly disappear. I assembled a small, discreet team. The journey was long, through pristine, snow-covered wilderness. The silence was profound, broken only by the hum of our snowmobiles. As we approached the coordinates, a small, rustic cabin emerged from the snow, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. We moved cautiously, surrounding the cabin. I knocked firmly on the wooden door. Silence. I knocked again, louder this time. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a gaunt, disheveled man. He was tall, his posture slightly hunched, and as he shifted his weight, I noticed the subtle, almost imperceptible drag of his left leg. Elias Thorne. His eyes, initially wary, widened slightly as they met mine. He knew. Detective Inspector Corpella, I stated, my voice firm. We need to talk about Anya Vertanen. He didn't resist. He invited us in, his voice raspy. The cabin was sparse, filled with camera equipment, tripods, and framed photographs of stark, beautiful landscapes. No signs of life, no warmth of human connection. We sat across from him. He finally broke the silence, his gaze fixed on a distant point outside the window, where the first faint hues of the aurora were beginning to paint the sky. She was beautiful, he whispered, his voice devoid of emotion. Like a star. She was out there, in the snow, playing with a small reindeer figurine. Under the lights. I was just observing, documenting the purity of it all. My blood ran cold. Observing, Mr. Thorne? Or praying? He finally met my gaze, a strange, detached glint in his eyes. I never touched her, detective. I swear it. I simply watched. And then she was gone. Just like that. Into the light. He then recounted his version of that night. He had indeed been photographing the aurora, using his new night vision lens to capture the subtle movements of the forest. He admitted to seeing Anya playing in her yard earlier that evening. Later, as the aurora intensified, he saw a shadow, a fleeting glimpse of something entering the Vertanen home. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, attributing it to a trick of the light or his focus on the celestial display. He confessed to having a peculiar fascination with perfect moments, capturing them from afar. His limp, he explained, was an old injury from a fall during a photography expedition. His story was chilling, yet internally consistent. He was a voyeur, perhaps disturbed, but not, he claimed, a kidnapper. He provided details about the fleeting shadow he saw, taller than Anya, moving quickly, merging with the shadows of the house. He claimed he dismissed it as a parent returning home or a relative. But now, with the weight of 10 years of an unsolved case, he realized the significance. We pressed him for more, for any detail, any impression of the shadow. He described it as unusually tall, with a distinct, almost lumbering gait, different from his own limp. The figure was wearing a long, dark coat, blending seamlessly with the night. It wasn't Elias Thorne who took Anya. He was a disturbed witness, a dark mirror reflecting the tragedy, but not the perpetrator. The realization was both a relief and a fresh wave of frustration. We had come so close, only to find another layer to the mystery. As we prepared to leave, I noticed a small, worn book on his table, nestled among his camera equipment. It was a children's storybook, illustrated with reindeer and stars. Starlight, Lena had called it, Anya's favorite. How did Elias Thorne have it? He saw my gaze. I found it, he said softly, a flicker of something akin to remorse in his eyes. In the snow, near the Vertanen's property, the morning after she vanished. It was lying in a small patch of melting snow, perfectly preserved. I didn't know what to do. I thought, maybe it was a sign. He had kept it for 10 years. A morbid keepsake, or a silent plea for answers. The book, a tangible link to Anya, was now a crucial piece of evidence. We returned to Rovaniemi, not with a solved case, but with a new lead, a new description, and a vital piece of Anya's life. The shadow Thorne described, the lumbering gait, the long coat, it didn't fit anyone we had previously interviewed. The Christmas Eve cold case wasn't over. Elias Thorne had been a false summit, but he had also provided a crucial vantage point. The book, Starlight, felt like a whisper from Anya herself, urging us to continue. The chilling truth was still out there, hidden in the silent, snowy landscapes of Finland, waiting for us to finally pull back the veil and reveal the true culprit, the one who truly made Anya vanish into the cold Arctic night. The hunt was far from over. Story 2. Edinburgh, a city draped in history and mist, has always held a peculiar charm for me. Its cobbled streets, ancient closes, and the towering silhouette of the castle always felt like stepping into a storybook. But never did I imagine I'd become a character in one of its most whispered tales. My name is Alex, and my story begins not in a grand hall or a bustling marketplace, but in the quiet, unassuming basement of a crumbling Georgian townhouse. I had inherited the townhouse from my great-aunt Evelyn, a woman of eccentric tastes and an even more eccentric will. Her lawyers had simply handed me a heavy, ornate key and a single, cryptic note. The real treasure lies beneath, Alex. Curiosity is your compass. I'd always thought Evelyn was prone to hyperbole, but as I stood in the dusty, neglected drawing room, the air thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten dreams, I felt a tremor of something more. The townhouse itself was a maze of dimly lit rooms, each filled with antique furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts. I spent days just exploring, half expecting Evelyn's spirit to materialize with a cup of Earl Grey. The basement, however, was a different matter. It was located beneath the kitchen, accessible only by a narrow, creaky wooden door that looked suspiciously out of place. It was sturdy, made of dark, heavy oak, unlike the lighter doors throughout the rest of the house. The key Evelyn had given me was undoubtedly for this door. The lock groaned as I turned the key, a sound that echoed unnervingly in the silence of the house. The door swung inward with a drawn-out creak, revealing not a set of stairs, but a sheer drop into darkness. A chill, damp air wafted up, carrying with it the scent of earth and something else, something metallic and ancient. My heart pounded. This wasn't just a cellar for storing preserves. I grabbed my phone, switching on its flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a rickety wooden ladder descending into the abyss. Below, I could just make out a compacted dirt floor. Taking a deep breath, I began my descent, each rung groaning under my weight. The air grew colder, the silence heavier, broken only by the rapid thrumming of my own heartbeat. When my feet finally touched the solid, damp earth, I swept the flashlight around. The basement was far larger than I'd anticipated. It wasn't a single room, but a series of interconnected chambers, carved seemingly out of the very bedrock beneath Edinburgh. The walls were uneven, rough-hewn stone, occasionally patched with crude brickwork. It felt less like a man-made structure, and more like a natural cave system that had been adapted. My light fell upon a small, wooden table in the first chamber. On it sat a dusty leather-bound journal and an oil lamp, its wick blackened and forgotten. My hands trembled as I picked up the journal. The cover was worn smooth, and the pages were brittle with age. Inside, the handwriting was neat, elegant, yet faded. The date on the first page read, October 17, 1888. It was Evelyn's handwriting. This wasn't just Evelyn's basement, it was her secret. The journal entries began with descriptions of her fascination with Edinburgh's hidden history, its underground passages, and the countless myths and legends that clung to the city like the morning fog. She wrote of ancient societies, forgotten rituals, and the whispers of a hidden source of power said to lie beneath the very foundations of the old town. Evelyn, it seemed, wasn't just an eccentric aunt. She was an amateur historian, an urban explorer, and perhaps something more. As I delved deeper into the journal, I learned of Evelyn's tireless research, her countless hours spent in dusty archives, and her conversations with equally unconventional scholars. She wrote of following obscure clues, deciphering ancient texts, and piecing together a puzzle that had held generations. The basement, she revealed, wasn't discovered by chance. She had specifically acquired the townhouse because she believed it sat directly above a convergence of these hidden passages, a nexus point of ancient energy. One entry, dated March 12, 1890, sent a shiver down my spine. "I've found it. Or rather, I found the entrance to it, deeper than I dared imagine, beyond the known passages. The air hums with an almost palpable energy. I feel it in my very bones. This wasn't a typical basement. It was an archaeological site, a personal quest that had consumed Evelyn's later years. I continued through the chambers, my flashlight dancing across walls that told their own silent stories. In one, there were crude carvings, symbols I didn't recognize, but which held a strange, hypnotic quality. In another, a collection of old tools, pickaxes and shovels, lay rusted against a wall, testament to Evelyn's arduous work. The air grew heavier, the silence more profound, as I ventured further. My phone, once my beacon, began to flicker, its battery draining rapidly in the strange atmosphere. I switched to the oil lamp Evelyn had left, fumbling with matches until the flames sputtered to life, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The warm, yellow light felt more fitting, more ancient, than the stark beam of my phone. The final chamber was unlike the others. It was larger, circular, and in its center stood a crude stone altar. Or perhaps it was a pedestal. On top of it, covered in a fine layer of dust, was a single, obsidian-like stone about the size of my fist. It wasn't faceted or polished, but rough, almost organic in its shape. As I drew closer, I felt a faint vibration emanating from it, a low hum that resonated in my chest. This was it. This was what Evelyn had written about. The source. I reached out a hesitant hand, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of the stone. A jolt, not unpleasant, but undeniably powerful, shot up my arm. Images flashed in my mind, ancient Edinburgh, bustling with life, whispers of forgotten rituals, the glint of moonlight on standing stones. It wasn't a vision, not exactly, more like an echo, a memory imprinted within the stone itself. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm me. What was this? Was I in danger? Had Evelyn unleashed something she couldn't control? My rational mind screamed for me to run, to leave this place and never look back. But something else, a deep-seated curiosity inherited from my great aunt, held me captive. I turned back to the journal, flipping through the remaining pages. Evelyn's later entries became less precise, more philosophical, almost poetic. She wrote of the stone's power, not as something malevolent, but as a wellspring of connection, a link to the collective unconscious of Edinburgh, perhaps even beyond. She believed it held the echoes of every life lived, every thought within the city's ancient boundaries. It is not a weapon, one entry read, nor a curse. It is a conduit, a whisper from the past, a guide for the future. Handle it with respect, Alex. It will show you what you need to see, not what you wish to see. My heart, still thrumming from the stone's touch, began to calm. Evelyn hadn't been reckless, she had been profound. This wasn't some dark magic, but something far more subtle, more ancient. It was the living memory of a city, accessible through this unique artifact. I spent hours in that final chamber, reading Evelyn's words and occasionally touching the stone again. Each time, the echoes were clearer, the connection stronger. I saw glimpses of ordinary lives, snippets of conversation, the smells of baking bread and burning coal, the sound of bagpipes fading into the night. It was like experiencing Edinburgh through 1,000 different eyes, a symphony of forgotten moments. I realized then that Evelyn's treasure wasn't gold or jewels, but knowledge, connection, and a deeper understanding of the world around us. She hadn't sought to exploit the stone's power, but to understand it, to learn from it. And now, she had entrusted that understanding to me. As dawn approached, a faint sliver of light filtering down the ladder, I packed the journal carefully into my backpack. I left the stone on its pedestal, understanding that its place was here, beneath the city it served to remember. I wasn't a scholar like Evelyn, nor a mystic, but I was her heir, and I carried a new, profound appreciation for the invisible threads that weave through history, connecting us all. Climbing back up the creaky ladder, the world above seemed brighter, louder, more vibrant than before. Edinburgh, for me, was no longer just a beautiful city. It was a living, breathing entity. Its secrets held not just in its ancient stones, but in the echoes that hummed beneath my very feet. The secret basement of Edinburgh wasn't a place of darkness or fear, but a sanctuary of memory, a testament to the enduring spirit of a city and the extraordinary legacy of an eccentric aunt. And I, Alex, was now a small part of its ongoing story. The mystery wasn't over, it had just begun. I knew then that my time in Edinburgh, and with Evelyn's secret, was far from over. I had a lot more to learn. Story 3. My breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhalation a ghostly whisper in the vast, silent expanse of the Canadian Rockies. The year was 1998, and I, Dr. Eris Thorne, a seasoned glaciologist, was on a solo expedition, mapping ice formations in a remote, uncharted valley. The solitude was usually a comfort, a balm to my often overstimulated mind, but today, an unnerving tremor of unease snaked through me. The sky, a bruised canvas of purple and gray, promised a blizzard of epic proportions. "Just a few more readings, Eris," I muttered to myself, my voice swallowed by the immense quiet. My fingers, numb even inside thick gloves, fumbled with the delicate instruments. The data I was collecting was crucial, hinting at an unprecedented rate of glacial retreat. I knew the risks of pushing my luck, but the scientific imperative often overshadowed common sense in my world. The first flakes began to fall, tentative at first, then rapidly escalating into a swirling maelstrom. Within minutes, the world dissolved into a blinding whiteout. The visibility dropped to mere feet, and the wind, a howling banshee, whipped the snow into a frenzy. I was caught. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at me. My small, portable shelter was a few miles back, a speck in this raging tempest. I pulled out my satellite phone, its screen a dim beacon in the gloom. No signal. Of course. This valley was known for its dead zones. I fought against the wind, each step a Herculean effort. My snowshoes, usually reliable extensions of my feet, felt like lead weights. The landscape, once familiar, was now an undifferentiated expanse of white. Every tree, every rock, had vanished under the suffocating blanket of snow. Disorientation set in swiftly, a terrifying unraveling of my sense of direction. Hours blurred into an eternity of battling the elements. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned, and a creeping lethargy began to embrace me. Hypothermia, the silent killer, was starting its work. I knew the signs: confusion, uncontrollable shivering, then a deceptive warmth. I had to keep moving. Then, through the swirling chaos, a flicker. A faint, almost imperceptible glow. Hope, a fragile ember, ignited within me. I stumbled towards it, driven by an primal instinct to survive. As I drew closer, the light resolved into a small, dilapidated cabin, half buried in snow. Its chimney, miraculously, was still emitting a thin wisp of smoke. With newfound adrenaline, I struggled to the door, a rough-hewn slab of wood. It creaked open, revealing a small, surprisingly warm interior. A fire crackled merrily in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the rough log walls. An old, gnarled man sat hunched by the fire, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as I entered, his eyes, the color of glacial ice, unblinking. "Welcome, traveler," he rasped, his voice like grinding stones. "The storm caught you, eh?" I nodded, too breathless to speak. He gestured to a worn wooden chair. "Sit. Warm yourself." He offered me a mug of steaming, bitter tea, which I gratefully accepted. The warmth spread through my chilled limbs, and a measure of my strength returned. "Thank you." I managed, my voice hoarse. "I'm Eris Thorne. I was caught in the blizzard." "Hi, many are," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Name's Elias. Been here longer than the snow has fallen." His words were enigmatic, but my exhaustion dulled my curiosity. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the crackling fire and the howling wind outside. The cabin, though small, felt impossibly vast, filled with an ancient quiet. As I began to recover, a strange detail caught my eye. On a rough shelf above the fireplace, nestled among old books and trinkets, was a compass. Not just any compass, but an antique brass one, identical to the one my grandfather, a renowned explorer, had carried. It had been lost on his last expedition, somewhere in these very mountains, decades ago. My heart hammered against my ribs. "That compass," I began, my voice trembling. "Where did you find it?" Elias looked at the compass, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "It was here when I arrived. A gift, perhaps, from the mountain itself." His answer was non-committal, yet something in his eyes, a glint of something deeply unsettling, made me shiver, and it wasn't from the cold. I felt a prickle of unease, a sense that something was profoundly wrong. I looked around the cabin again, taking in the details. There were no supplies, no food visible, only the fire and Elias. He seemed to sustain himself on nothing. "How long have you been here, Elias?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Time has little meaning here, Eris. The mountain keeps its own counsel." The blizzard raged outside, a relentless white curtain. I knew I couldn't venture out, not yet. But the longer I stayed, the more profound the feeling of unease became. My scientific mind, trained to observe and analyze, began to piece together disjointed observations. No dust on anything, despite the age of the cabin. The fire, burning eternally without visible fuel. and Elias himself, an unnervingly still figure, his eyes holding a depth that seemed to stretch back through centuries. Suddenly, a faint, almost imperceptible sound drifted through the roaring wind, a bell. A small, clear chime, like those used to mark the hour in old churches. But there was no church for hundreds of miles. Elias's gaze sharpened, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "The mountain calls," he murmured, rising slowly. As he stood, a shimmering, almost translucent quality to his form became apparent in the firelight. My blood ran cold. He wasn't entirely there. He was a specter, a remnant. "Who are you, Elias?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He turned to me, his smile wider now, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too white. "I am the one who waits. The one who has waited for you, Eris Thorn." The world spun. My grandfather's compass. Elias's strange timelessness. The bell. A terrible realization dawned upon me, chilling me to the bone more than any blizzard ever could. "My grandfather," I breathed. Did he find you?" Elias nodded, his gaze compassionate, yet infinitely sad. He sought what he could not comprehend. "As do you." The bell chimed again, louder this time, reverberating through the small cabin. Elias began to fade, his form becoming more transparent, like mist in the morning sun. "The storm will pass, Eris," he said, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "But some disappearances are not meant to be found." And then he was gone, vanished. The fire in the hearth dwindled, and a sudden, profound cold permeated the cabin. I scrambled to the window. The blizzard was abating, the wind dying down to a mournful sigh. Patches of the bruised sky were visible, and the first stars began to twinkle through the fading white. I was alone, truly alone. The next morning, as the sun climbed above the majestic, snow-capped peaks, painting the landscape in hues of gold and rose, I found my way back to my camp. My satellite phone, miraculously, now had a signal. I called for extraction, my voice strangely calm. They found no trace of the cabin, no sign of Elias. My story was met with polite skepticism, attributed to the effects of extreme exposure. I had no proof, only the memory of the glacial eyes and the chilling revelation. The compass was gone from the shelf, and I didn't mention it. But I knew. The snowstorm disappearance of 1998 had not claimed me, but it had shown me a truth beyond the realm of glaciology. It had shown me the thin veil between our world and the timeless mysteries of the mountains, and the eternal guardians who wait within their snowy embrace. And I carried with me not just the data of retreating glaciers, but the profound, unsettling knowledge that some disappearances are not truly disappearances at all, but a transition into a different kind of existence, hidden by the very storms that brought them. Story 4. The biting Austrian winter wind whipped around me, carrying the scent of pine and the distant, muffled sounds of Christmas carols. Vienna in December was a city of glittering lights and ancient charm, a perfect backdrop for the International Choral Festival. As Eleanor Vance, a renowned choral conductor, I'd come seeking inspiration, hoping to find new voices for my own prestigious London choir. Instead, I found myself entangled in a chilling nightmare, a killer lurking among the harmonious voices. It began subtly, a discordant note in the otherwise perfect symphony of the festival. Rehearsals at the historic St. Stephen's Cathedral were intense, the pressure palpable. Choirs from around the world, each a beacon of vocal excellence, vied for the coveted Golden Note Award. My own choir, the Harmonics, had arrived with high hopes, a blend of seasoned professionals and promising young talent. The first incident was dismissed as an unfortunate accident. Lucas Schmidt, the baritone from the esteemed Vienna Boys Choir, collapsed during a strenuous rehearsal, his face ashen. The official cause was a sudden heart arrhythmia, exacerbated by stress. But I noticed something unsettling, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of bitter almonds lingering in the air around him. I chalked it up to my heightened senses, perhaps overstimulated by the grandeur of the cathedral. The festival continued, but a creeping unease settled over the participants. Whispers circulated, hushed and nervous, fueled by the inexplicable. 2 days later, during a combined choir rehearsal in the opulent Musikverein, a soprano from the Norwegian choir, Ingrid Solberg, began to lose her voice. Her vibrant, clear notes became hoarse, then barely a whisper. She was rushed to the hospital, diagnosed with severe vocal cord inflammation. Again, I detected that fleeting almond scent. My gut screamed. This was no accident. I approached Detective Inspector Klaus Richter, a stern-faced man with weary eyes, responsible for the festival's security. He listened patiently, a skeptical arch to his eyebrow. Dr. Vance, with all due respect, these are highly stressed individuals. The demands of this festival are immense. It's likely psychosomatic. And the almond scent, Inspector? I pressed, my voice tight with urgency. It's characteristic of cyanide. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. We found no evidence of foul play in Mr. Schmidt's case. And Ms. Solberg's condition is a medical issue. His dismissal stung, but I understood. Without concrete evidence, my suspicions were merely conjecture. Undeterred, I began my own quiet investigation. My musical ear was trained to detect the slightest nuance, the faintest deviation. I started observing everyone, every subtle gesture, every strained smile. The competitive atmosphere, usually a healthy rivalry, now felt charged with a sinister undercurrent. I noticed a particular pattern. Both Lucas and Ingrid had been at the top of their respective sections, strong contenders for individual recognition. Could this be about sabotage, taken to a deadly extreme? My own choir members, bless them, were becoming increasingly anxious. They looked to me for reassurance, and I did my best to provide it, all while my mind raced, trying to connect the invisible dots. I began to spend more time in the common areas, the green rooms, the cafeteria, trying to pick up on any unusual conversations or behaviors. Then came the third incident, and this time, it was impossible to ignore. Professor Alistair Finch, the notoriously harsh and brilliant chief adjudicator, was found unresponsive in his private dressing room at the Konzerthaus. He had been alone, preparing for the final judging round. This time, the almond scent was undeniable, potent and sickly sweet. The police were called in full force. Inspector Richter, his skepticism replaced by grim determination, now looked at me with a new gravity. "Dr. Vance," he said, his voice low, "it seems your feelings were more accurate than my logic. We have a murderer among us." The festival grounds were locked down. Panic erupted among the participants. Accusations flew, suspicions simmered. Rehearsals ceased. The beautiful music of Vienna was replaced by the ugly cacophony of fear. I revisited the details of each victim. Lucas, a rising star, known for his pristine technique. Ingrid, a soprano with a voice of ethereal beauty. And Professor Finch, whose judgments could make or break careers. What did they have in common beyond their musical excellence? I remembered a tense exchange I'd witnessed between Professor Finch and her Anton Gruber, the festival's long-serving technical director. Gruber, a quiet, almost invisible man, seemed to harbor a deep resentment towards Finch. Finch had publicly critiqued Gruber's sound engineering, calling it amateurish and a disservice to true artistry. My thoughts raced. Access! Gruber had access to every part of the festival venues. The backstage, the dressing rooms, the ventilation systems. The method of poisoning, subtle and almost undetectable, pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of the venues and the victims' routines. I also recalled seeing Gruber near Lucas and Ingrid just before their incidents. He always seemed to be lurking in the periphery, observing. I sought out Inspector Richter. "Inspector," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, "I believe the killer is Anton Gruber." He looked at me, a mixture of surprise and contemplation on his face. "Gruber? He's been with the festival for decades. No criminal record. He had motive," I explained, recounting the public humiliation inflicted by Professor Finch. "And he had the means. He knows these venues inside out. The poison, the method of delivery, it had to be someone with that kind of access and stealth." Richter hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "It's a strong theory. We'll bring him in for questioning." The interrogation of Anton Gruber was intense. He initially feigned ignorance, his eyes darting nervously. But under Richter's relentless questioning, coupled with my observations and the undeniable evidence of cyanide poisoning, his composure cracked. He confessed. His motive was a twisted blend of professional humiliation and a warped sense of protecting the purity of the festival. He believed Finch was corrupting the judging process with his elitist views. He saw Lucas and Ingrid as examples of Finch's favorites, undeserving of their talent, and sought to eliminate them as a way to send a message. The method was simple yet insidious. He had aerosolized tiny amounts of cyanide, releasing them through ventilation systems or directly into beverages when no one was looking, timed to affect his victims during peak stress, masking the symptoms. The festival was immediately canceled. The Golden Note Award would remain unclaimed that year. The beautiful music of Vienna was silenced, replaced by the somber notes of justice. I left Vienna a few days later, the festive lights now seeming hollow, the carols carrying a melancholic echo. The memory of the killer's cold, calculating eyes would forever haunt me. I had come seeking harmony, but I had found discord, a chilling reminder that even among the most beautiful voices, a killer can lurk, shattering the perfect melody with a deadly, silent note. My own choir, the Harmonics, returned to London, shaken but more unified, having faced a darkness that no rehearsal could ever prepare them for. The experience had scarred us, but it had also, in a strange way, made us stronger, more aware of the fragility of life and the preciousness of every single, harmonious note. Story 5. The neon glow of Tokyo was my constant companion, a vibrant hum against the quiet dedication of my craft. As Kenji Tanaka, proprietor and head chef of Sakura no Ki, Cherry Blossom Tree, I lived and breathed the delicate balance of omakase. Each dish was a poem, a fleeting masterpiece, crafted from the freshest ingredients sourced with painstaking care. My restaurant, nestled in a quiet Ginza alley, was a haven for those seeking an authentic culinary experience, a taste of Japan's soul. But lately, an unsettling undercurrent had begun to ripple through my meticulously ordered world. It started subtly, a misplaced knife here, a forgotten ingredient there. Minor infractions, easily dismissed as the fatigue of long hours. Then came the whispers. Other renowned chefs in Tokyo were disappearing. Not just closing their restaurants, but truly vanishing, leaving behind no trace, no forwarding address, no explanation. The police, it seemed, were baffled. Another one, Kenji-san, my sous chef, Akio, murmured one crisp autumn evening, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination as he scrolled through his phone. Chef Yamamoto of Shogun's Feast. Gone. My heart gave a lurch. Yamamoto was a legend, a master of traditional kaiseki. If he could disappear without a trace, who was safe? A cold knot of dread began to tighten in my stomach. I found myself looking over my shoulder more often, scrutinizing the faces of my patrons, wondering if one of them held a secret, a key to this chilling mystery. I tried to dismiss it, to focus on the intricate dance of knife and fire that was my life. But the mystery gnawed at me. I began to spend my evenings, after the last customer had departed and the kitchen was spotless, poring over news articles, searching for a pattern, a common thread among the vanished. The victims were all highly respected, traditional Japanese chefs. Their restaurants, though varied in style, shared a commitment to meticulous detail and an almost spiritual reverence for ingredients. One night, as I meticulously sliced a delicate piece of odoro for the next day's service, I noticed something peculiar. A faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted from the usually pristine air vents. A hint of nashi pears, but with an odd, metallic tang. I dismissed it as my imagination, overworked from the stress. The following week, the sense of unease intensified. I caught glimpses of shadows flickering at the edge of my vision, heard faint whispers that vanished when I turned to pinpoint their source. My sleep became restless, haunted by dreams of empty kitchens and echoing silence. Akio, ever observant, noticed my pallor. "Are you all right, chef?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You seem distant." I waved off his worries, blaming it on the upcoming food festival. But internally I was a coiled spring. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was next. The metallic nashi scent grew stronger, now undeniably present whenever I was alone in the restaurant after closing. One moonlit night, after the last gleam had been polished from the counter and the final lock secured, I decided to wait. I hid in the walk-in cooler, the frigid air a sharp contrast to the heat of my apprehension. I watched the clock tick by, the silence of the restaurant amplifying every creak and groan of the old building. Then I heard it, a soft click from the front door, barely audible. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moved through the dining room. My heart hammered against my ribs. I peered through the narrow crack of the cooler door, my breath catching in my throat. A figure, cloaked in black, moved silently towards my kitchen. They were tall, slender, and seemed to glide rather than walk. The nashi scent, now potent and sickly sweet, filled the air. The figure stopped at my prized cutting board, the one I had inherited from my grandfather, and picked up my most treasured knife, a centuries-old yanagiba, its blade as sharp and reflective as a still pond. A chef's soul, a voice surprisingly soft and melodic, whispered. It resides within their tools, their ingredients, their unwavering dedication. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a thief. This was something far more sinister. I recognized the voice, faintly, from an old television interview with Akihiro Sato, a reclusive food critic known for his eccentric tastes and profound, almost mystical understanding of Japanese cuisine. He had vanished years ago, presumed dead. The figure, Akihiro Sato, began to hum a low, ancient tune. He picked up a perfectly ripe matsutake mushroom, its earthy aroma usually a delight, but now tainted by the cloying sweetness of the nashi. He held it up to the moonlight streaming through the kitchen window, his eyes, I could now see, glowing with an unnatural luminescence. They were not worthy, he intoned, his voice gaining a chilling resonance. They merely cooked. They did not feel the essence. Only those who truly understand the spirit of ingredients, who imbue their dishes with their very being, are worthy of immortality. My mind raced. Immortality? What madness was this? Sato began to perform a bizarre ritual, a series of precise, almost dance-like movements with the mushroom and my knife, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. As he did, the air in the kitchen grew thick, shimmering as if heat waves were rising from an invisible fire. The scent of nashi was overpowering, laced now with something metallic, something like blood. I couldn't stay hidden any longer. This wasn't just about my restaurant, it was about the very soul of Japanese cuisine. I burst from the cooler, grabbing a heavy cast-iron pan as I emerged. Sato spun, his glowing eyes fixing on me. A flicker of surprise, then a knowing smile played on his lips. "Ah, Kenji Tanaka, I knew you would come. Your spirit is strong, stronger than the others. What have you done to them?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound like autumn leaves. "I have elevated them, transformed them. They are now one with the ingredients they so cherished. Their essence, their skill, is now mine to command." He held up the matsutake, which now pulsed with a faint, unearthly light. "This is their collective spirit, the essence of their craft distilled." He lunged, not with violence, but with a strange, almost ethereal grace. He moved like smoke, his hand reaching for my chest. I swung the pan, connecting with a dull thud against his arm. He reeled back, a look of genuine surprise on his face. He wasn't entirely incorporeal, but he was certainly not fully human. "A crude weapon, chef," he hissed, his voice losing its melodic quality, replaced by a guttural rasp. "But effective, it seems." The kitchen became a blur of motion. I dodged his ethereal lunges, my training as a chef, with its emphasis on precision and swift movements, serving me surprisingly well. I used the familiar layout of my kitchen to my advantage, weaving between counters, overturning stools to impede his progress. The nashi scent was suffocating, and the air crackled with a strange energy. I realized then that his power seemed to be intrinsically linked to the ritual, to the ingredients he was manipulating. If I could disrupt his focus, perhaps I could break his hold. My gaze fell on a bucket of freshly sharpened sushi knives, each one a testament to countless hours of meticulous work. A desperate plan formed in my mind. As he lunged again, I ducked under his arm, grabbed a handful of salt from a large container, and flung it into his face. He recoiled with a shriek, his glowing eyes dimming for a moment. In that instant, I seized the opportunity. I grabbed a handful of the sharpest knives and, with a desperate prayer, flung them towards the pulsating matsutake mushroom in his hand. The blade struck true, not piercing the mushroom, but creating a shower of sparks as they impacted something unseen. A high-pitched, wailing sound ripped through the air, and the glowing mushroom flickered violently, then dimmed. Sato staggered back, clutching his hand, his form wavering like a distorted image. "No!" he shrieked, his voice filled with genuine agony. My essence." The nashi scent began to recede, replaced by the faint, comforting aroma of fresh seafood and simmering dashi. Sato, his form now transparent and shimmering, turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and despair. "You have destroyed it," he whispered, his voice fading. "You have shattered the vessel." He dissolved then, like smoke in the wind, leaving behind only the faintest echo of the unsettling nashi scent and the lingering chill in the air. The matsutake mushroom lay on the floor, no longer pulsating, its vibrant color dulled. It looked like an ordinary mushroom, albeit one that had witnessed something truly extraordinary. The police, when I finally called them, found no trace of Sato, no evidence of a struggle beyond the overturned stools. They dismissed my fantastical tale as a stress-induced hallucination, urging me to get some rest. I didn't try to convince them. How could they understand? Life at Sakura, no key, slowly returned to normal. The whispers of vanishing chefs subsided, replaced by the usual buzz of restaurant gossip. But I was changed. I still crafted my dishes with dedication, but now there was a deeper understanding, a quiet reverence for the life that flowed through every ingredient. I knew the true meaning of immortality for a chef, not through some dark ritual, but through the enduring legacy of their craft, passed down through generations, nourishing both body and soul. And as for the metallic nashi scent, every now and then on a quiet night, I thought I caught a faint whiff of it, a chilling reminder of the night I faced the vanishing chef and saved my own culinary soul. Story 6. The scent of lavender and the distant hum of cicadas usually meant peace, but this time, a chill snaked down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. I, Clara Maxwell, had eagerly anticipated this 2-week escape to our idyllic holiday home in Provence. It was meant to be a reprieve from the relentless pace of London life, a chance to reconnect with my husband, Tom, and simply exist. Instead, I found myself staring at a scene that would forever haunt my memories. The lifeless body of our enigmatic neighbor, Pierre Dubois, sprawled across his sun-drenched patio. Tom was the first to discover him. We'd been enjoying a quiet dinner on our own terrace when Tom, ever the considerate neighbor, decided to pop over and invite Pierre for a drink. Pierre was a reclusive man, an artist, but occasionally he'd join us for a glass of rose. I remember Tom's sharp intake of breath, then his strangled cry. My heart leaped into my throat as I ran to him, my gaze following his horrified stare. Pierre lay face down, a dark stain blossoming on the back of his pristine white shirt. A ornate letter opener, one I recognized from his vast collection, lay glinting ominously a few feet away. The air, usually so vibrant with the sounds of the Provençal evening, was thick with a chilling silence. "Call the police, Clara. Now." Tom's voice was hoarse, his face ashen. My hands trembled as I fumbled with my phone, the unfamiliar French emergency number a blur through my tears. The next few hours were a dizzying carousel of flashing lights, stern-faced gendarmes, and a sense of unreality that pressed down on me like the oppressive summer heat. Detective Fournier, a man whose weary eyes seemed to have seen too much, was in charge. He spoke English with a heavy accent, but his meaning was clear. We were persons of interest. The idea was absurd. Tom and I had no reason to harm Pierre. Our interactions were polite, if infrequent. He was a talented artist, known for his abstract landscapes, but he was also notoriously private, almost aloof. Yet, as Detective Fournier meticulously questioned us, every innocent detail of our lives in Provence felt twisted into something sinister. "Madame Maxwell, Monsieur Maxwell, what was your relationship with Monsieur Dubois?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "Neighbors, that's all," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "We'd wave, sometimes chat about the weather. Tom occasionally went over to admire his paintings." Tom nodded, adding, "He was a fascinating artist. A bit eccentric, but harmless." The detective scribbled in his notebook. "Did he have any enemies? Any disputes?" We shook our heads. Pierre seemed to exist in his own world, detached from the petty squabbles of the village. As the days crawled by, the idyllic charm of our holiday home evaporated, replaced by an unsettling atmosphere of suspicion. Every shadow seemed to hide a secret. Every whispered conversation in the village felt directed at us. The gendarmes searched Pierre's house thoroughly, emerging with boxes of documents and what looked like a half-finished painting. I found myself replaying every interaction with Pierre, searching for a hidden clue, a telltale sign that I had missed. I remembered a conversation we'd had a few days prior. He'd seemed agitated, pacing his studio. "The truth," he'd muttered, almost to himself, "always finds a way." I'd dismissed it as an artist's musings, but now it echoed with a chilling resonance. One afternoon, unable to simply sit and wait, I decided to take a walk through the lavender fields. It was a desperate attempt to clear my head, to find some semblance of the peace that had drawn us here. As I walked, I noticed a small, unmarked path leading deeper into the fields, a path I'd never seen before. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in times like these, urged me forward. The path led to a small, dilapidated shed, almost swallowed by the overgrown foliage. It looked abandoned, but something compelled me to investigate. The door creaked open, revealing a dusty, disused space. My eyes scanned the interior, landing on a loose floorboard in the corner. My heart hammered against my ribs as I knelt down, prying it open. Inside, wrapped in a faded cloth, was a small wooden box. My hands trembled as I opened it. It contained a stack of old letters, yellowed with age, and a tarnished silver locket. The letters were in French, but my basic understanding allowed me to piece together fragments. They were love letters, dated decades ago, addressed to a woman named Elodie. And then I saw it, a photograph tucked beneath the letters. It was a younger Pierre, his arm around a beautiful woman with striking, familiar eyes. Her smile was radiant, her face full of life. But it wasn't just her beauty that captivated me. It was the striking resemblance to someone else I knew. Someone I'd seen almost every day since we arrived in Provence. Elodie was the spitting image of Sylvie, Detective Fournier's wife, who often helped him with translations. My mind raced. Could Sylvie be Elodie? Was there a hidden connection between Pierre and the detective's family? It seemed too much of a coincidence. I quickly gathered the box, my pulse racing, and rushed back to our villa. I showed Tom my discovery, and his eyes widened in disbelief. "This changes everything, Clara," he whispered. We immediately contacted Detective Fournier, arranging a private meeting. He arrived, his face a mask of professional courtesy, but when I produced the box and the photograph, his composure faltered. His eyes, usually so weary, flashed with a mixture of shock and a deep, unspoken pain. "Elodie," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "My sister." He explained that Elodie had disappeared years ago, presumed dead, leaving behind a heartbroken family. Pierre had been her secret lover, a relationship his family had disapproved of. The letters spoke of a plan to elope, a life together that never materialized. Pierre believed she had been murdered, Fournier explained, his voice thick with emotion. He had spent years trying to find proof, convinced someone was covering it up. The detective then revealed that Pierre had recently approached him, claiming to have finally found conclusive evidence regarding Elodie's disappearance. He had been planning to expose the truth, to finally bring justice for his lost love. It was clear now, Pierre had been silenced. Someone didn't want the truth to come out. The case took a dramatic turn. Detective Fournier, driven by a personal vendetta, redoubled his efforts. The investigation shifted from us to a wider circle of suspects, focusing on those who might have had a motive to keep Elodie's disappearance a secret. Eventually, the truth surfaced, darker and more complex than we could have imagined. The killer was not a stranger, but a prominent figure in the local community, a man who had held a powerful secret for decades. He had been involved in a scandal surrounding Elodie's family, and her disappearance was a direct consequence of his actions. Pierre, in his relentless pursuit of justice, had become a threat. As the Provençal sun set on our final evening, casting long shadows across the lavender fields, a profound sense of relief washed over me. The beauty of the region, once overshadowed by fear, began to re-emerge. We had stumbled into a tragedy, become entangled in a mystery, but ultimately, we had played a part in bringing a long-buried truth to light. Our holiday home, once a place of dread, now felt like a testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the most idyllic settings, secrets can fester, and the pursuit of justice, however painful, will always find a way. We left Provence, not with the carefree memories we had anticipated, but with a deeper understanding of human nature and a quiet respect for the enduring power of truth. Story 7. The biting Berlin wind whipped around me as I clutched the worn leather suitcase, its contents a complete mystery. My name is Alex, and just hours ago, this very case had been delivered to my tiny apartment with a cryptic note. For Alex. A piece of your past, a key to your future. Seek the truth in the heart of Germany. My grandmother, a woman of quiet strength and even quieter secrets, had passed away a month prior. Her life had been a closed book, particularly her early years in Germany before she immigrated to America. This suitcase, old and bearing a faded travel tag for Hamburg, felt like a direct message from beyond. Inside, nestled amongst layers of tissue paper, I found a collection of items that seemed to whisper stories of a bygone era. A brittle sepia-toned photograph showed a young woman, strikingly similar to my grandmother in her youth, standing in front of a grand, Gothic-looking church. Her arm was linked with a serious-looking man, and both wore expressions of quiet determination. There was also a small, tarnished silver locket, unreadable engravings on its back, and a delicate, pressed edelweiss flower, its petals still holding a ghostly hint of white. But the most intriguing item was a thick, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with elegant, looping German script. I don't speak German, but the internet is a powerful tool. With the help of an online translator, I began to decipher the first few entries. The journal belonged to my grandmother, Ilara. It spoke of wartime Germany, of struggle, and of a deep, abiding love. The man in the photograph, I learned, was named Klaus. He was a scientist, and their love story, as recounted in Ilara's beautiful prose, unfolded against the backdrop of a nation in turmoil. The journal hinted at a dangerous secret Klaus was working on, something that could either save or destroy countless lives. He had entrusted Ilara with safeguarding something vital, something connected to the future of science, and the suitcase, I now realized, was more than just a memento. It was a vessel of his legacy, and by extension hers. My translator app became my constant companion as I devoured the journal's contents. It became clear that the church in the photograph wasn't just a picturesque backdrop. It was a meeting point, a place where Alara and Klaus had shared their hopes and fears. The engravings on the locket, when finally deciphered, read, Dom St. Michael, Hamburg. Seek the light within the shadow. A jolt went through me. Dom St. Michael. St. Michael's Church in Hamburg. It was a famous landmark, and it clicked into place like a key in a lock. The suitcase wasn't just about my past, it was a roadmap. Driven by an irresistible urge to uncover my family's history, I booked the next flight to Hamburg. The journey was a blur of nervous anticipation and the constant hum of the journal's translated words in my mind. Landing in Hamburg, the crisp air and the historic architecture enveloped me. The city, rebuilt from the ashes of war, buzzed with a vibrant energy, a stark contrast to the journal's somber entries. Finding Dom St. Michael was easy. Its towering spire pierced the cloudy sky, an imposing and beautiful structure. As I approached, a familiar sense of déjà vu washed over me. This was the place, the very spot where my grandmother and Klaus had stood. Inside, the vastness of the nave was awe-inspiring, stained glass windows casting colorful patterns on the stone floor. I walked slowly, my eyes scanning for any clue, any sign that might connect to the journal's cryptic entries. The journal mentioned a hidden compartment, a place where Klaus had planted the seed of their hope. I reread the locket's inscription, Seek the light within the shadow. This phrase echoed in my mind. I began to explore the darker corners of the church, the quieter chapels, and the ancient crypt. Finally, in a dimly lit alcove behind a centuries-old statue of an angel, I noticed a subtle difference in the stonework. A small, almost imperceptible seam in the wall. My heart pounded. This had to be it. With trembling fingers, I pressed against the stone. It gave way with a soft click, revealing a narrow, dust-filled cavity. Inside, wrapped in an old linen cloth, was a small wooden box. I carefully pulled it out, my hands shaking. The box was surprisingly light. Opening it, I found not gold or jewels, but a single meticulously preserved microfilm reel. And a short, handwritten note in English. For the future, may this knowledge be used for good. K and E. The microfilm. This was Klaus's secret, the key to my future. I knew instantly what it was. During the war, many brilliant scientists worked on incredible breakthroughs, some for destructive purposes, others with the hope of a better world. Klaus, I realized, was one of the latter. He had entrusted Alara with his research, knowing it could change the world, and she, in turn, had ensured it reached the right hands through me. I flew back to Berlin, the microfilm reel now safely secured. I contacted a university professor specializing in historical scientific research, cautiously explaining my discovery. The professor, initially skeptical, became increasingly intrigued as I detailed the contents of the journal and the story of Alara and Klaus. Days turned into weeks as the microfilm was analyzed. The results were astounding. Klaus had been working on a revolutionary clean energy source, a technology far ahead of its time, designed to power a world without pollution or conflict. He had envisioned a future of abundance, not destruction. The secret of the suitcase wasn't a hidden treasure of material wealth, but a far more valuable legacy, knowledge, hope, and the unwavering belief in a better tomorrow. My grandmother, Alara, had not just preserved a piece of her past. She had safeguarded a vision for the future, a vision that I was now entrusted to help bring to light. The world of my quiet, reserved grandmother had suddenly expanded, revealing a woman of immense courage and foresight. I stood on the precipice of something truly momentous, connected to a legacy of love, sacrifice, and groundbreaking innovation. The suitcase, once a mere object, had become a portal, not just to my past, but to a future I was now compelled to shape.